This is a preview of what I plan to show on Monday the 27th about authoring in XR as a brief introduction to our discussion. So there are different aspects to authoring. There's the reading and research, thinking and writing, and publishing. We're not going to be focusing on publishing, even though it is important, because at this point we don't really think it's core. One thing that is definitely core, though, is the active reading, doing an annotated bibliography. So if we look at the active reading of highlighting, commenting, notating, and writing separately an annotated bibliography, this is a really important task for an academic. So it should be done with the best kind of environment, and therefore we are going for PDFs converted to JSON so that you have real interactive documents to deal with. And of course, when you export, you can export back to PDF with JSON Visual Meta and plain JSON. We'll also have the additional affordance of extracted text. Essentially, in XR, you pull a bit onto space, so it's a different kind of annotation. So let's go on to the main bits of writing in one sense, which has these elements. Let me just show the difference between what I call, for the sake of this initial discussion, document components here on the right and sources on the left. Let's look at the sources in the environment. So if we start on the left, we have papers and books in different ways. We have authors' documents. We could have maybe the author's knowledge map or another knowledge map, 3D objects, research data, and so on. These can then be filtered to display what the user wants based on lots of different criteria, including at the bottom connected to and connected from, which is a bit of a citation map or a citation tree. We then, as a community, need to start deciding on how this should be presented as lists in space, word clouds, geographic maps, knowledge maps, all kinds of things. What I've written here are just some initial ideas, and surrounding all of this is the environment, which can be pure VR, which is what we're talking about now. It can also be different rooms somehow connected. There can be bookshelves that has this information, and so on. The document itself, for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to separate core and contextual. And as I've written here in tiny text, core doesn't necessarily mean main, but it's kind of the standard bits of a document. So you have body text with sections and paragraphs depending on how you want to be able to divide it up. You can do what I call semantic encoding. It can be as simple as bolding, making lists, marking text, highlighting, and very importantly, making headings. You can also choose to move these components in 2D or 3D space, which is a big part of what I hope we'll be doing. The contextual stuff, such as your notes, endnotes, footnotes, glossary, also the stuff from outside you put in, the connections you add, and the framing that you add also needs to be taken into account. I call them contextual because they can be in the document linearly, or they can relatively easily, conceptually at least, be separate. So we need to then think about the workspace views. Maybe we shouldn't call this document, maybe we should just call this a workspace, but it can be traditional linear vertical, or you can have each section can be a vertical strip laid out horizontally. It can be outlined, collapsed, folded to showing only headings or more, such as we do in Author, for example. And then, of course, there can be 2D or 3D maps, nodes or cards. By nodes or cards separately, it's a question of how they go between each other, either as kind of click on one to suddenly you're at another one, or you visually move. These are really important, huge issues in bullet points, or entirely separate spaces. Interactions we need to be able to have the user do is things like place things, and then of course copy, and to change views, both of the core, contextual, and the environment sources information. So in summary, we have sources, core document, contextual elements, and we have views of all of this. Like I said, we need to be able to change, and interactions. So here, highlighting some of these issues. I hope we can go through and have a useful discussion on what of this you may like. Maybe you don't like some of this naming, totally fine. We will change it to go through and build a better understanding of what the elements are of working in XR, so that we can get to the next level of trying to figure out what our opportunities are. So thank you very much for having a look at this little bit of a preview.